All right. Hi, everyone. So excited to see some new faces, some familiar faces. I was going to do a little intro, but I'm going to go over Zoom functions first since people are rolling in. Please just keep your Zoom muted at all times. So we are going to have times that we would like to interact with y'all. Please try to utilize the chat functions as much as possible. Due to the pandemic, we've had to do all of our meetings virtually, but we still want to interact with y'all. I'm not going to press you to put your cameras on, but we would love to see your faces. And also we have the little reaction. So there's like a raising hand function, there's a thumbs up, there's a heart. Use those as much as possible to try to interact with our panelists. With us today. This is the very final conversation of the cultural appropriation series that we have been doing since June. Today we'll be focusing on the Pacific Islander community. My name is Janessa. I'm the executive director of D.I.V.A. I started D.I.V.A in December of 2019. I just realized that Utah's unique racial climate and environment kind of needed to have a brave space where we can engage in dialogue, share our stories, and broaden our perspectives of life. So thank you for being here today. I think this is so important. Make sure you connect with us on our Instagram, diva_SLC, and subscribe to our website. That is where we'll be updating all of you about our events. Starting on the next year, we're going to be working on a huge project called Ending Racism in Utah Schools. We'll be working with local legislators, and we've been collecting testimony from students all across Utah's Valley to try to protect our children and their schools and make sure that they are in a safe learning environment. So that is what we'll be doing next year. Make sure you keep posted with us. I'm going to let my board members that are here today introduce themselves. I'll start with Rebecca and then pass it over to Adia and then Mayella.
Hello, everyone. So glad you're here today. My name is Rebecca Blanton, she, her pronouns, and I am D.I.V.A's Director of Content Creations. So you'll see me, on the social feeds, posting, keeping you all updated on everything happening. And yeah, just excited to be here all together today. And I'll pass it over. How about over to Mayella?
Hi, I'm Mayella Tarver. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm D.I.V.A's Director of Inclusivity and Equity. I'm here to vocalize and be there as an ally for all of my people of color and all my minorities to make sure you guys have a safe space here. I'm excited. We've been on a long roll with this conversation. There's always great stories and great learning and understanding, great times to be vulnerable in this space. So please utilize it. Please learn, love, and embrace these people are here. I'll pass it on to Adia.
Hi, I'm Adia Estes. I'm the secretary for D.I.V.A. She, they pronouns. I do a lot of behind the scenes work, so you're not going to see a lot of me, but I'm glad to be here.
And then our speakers are going to have a big introduction a little bit, but just so you're familiar with who they are, we have Sania, Marosa, and Pauli here today. If you want to just do a little wave to everyone, we'll get to you in a second.
All right, so we start off with the definition of culture since we're talking about cultural appropriation. Culture is defined as the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. This is what really defines the race and ethnicity of people of color specifically, but all people in general. So that's very important.
What is cultural appropriation? It is defined as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society.
What is cross-cultural appropriation? Cross-cultural appropriation occurs when someone, a part of an institutionalized community, takes part in offensive transgressions towards another. When we talk about cross-cultural appropriation, we're specifically talking about the BIPOC community and how, due to a lack of understanding, due to the white supremacist system that we're ingrained in, we fall into practices that are supposed to be divisive towards our community and building solidarity. So specifically here, we're talking about the N-word and how that's been used by other people of color that don't identify as Black or African American or African. And then right here on the right, we have a picture of Mike Tyson, who's a Black man appropriating Pacific Islander culture with the use of a tattoo that is specifically appropriating Maori culture, which has a negative connotation and discriminates towards the Pacific Islander community and how they traditionally practice them, which you'll see with our speakers later on. Right now in this space, we're really talking about white consumerism as a form of cultural appropriation. What we mean by white consumerism is how the material possessions and possessive identity of whiteness has constructed consumption of other people's cultures, other people's goods, other people's lands, and how that's an invasion of space, and inviting these people and understanding the traditional practices, the traditional ways and forms of consumption creates a system of living where the good of the total group is prioritized over individual wealth or well-being, or the quality of just actually purchasing and acquiring goods, and how that's also a form of whiteness in terms of consumer culture, white privilege in terms of colonization, and a way to forge divisiveness and towards the BIPOC community.
Hi, so I am Sinia. My pronouns are she, her, her. My full name is Sinia Mila. I just go by Nia or Nia. I am a second generation American. My dad was born in Tonga and he came to Utah with his parents, lived the rest of his life out here. My mom was born in Hawaii. She, same thing, came with her parents and was raised in West Valley City, Utah. So with that being said, I am full Tongan. I grew up here in Utah, which is predominantly white. I grew up in a traditional Tongan home. I was mainly around my grandma and her sisters. So as a Tongan woman, I definitely feel I was embraced in the home. And outside of the home, I never really thought about like racial identity. Because I grew up in West Valley, it's a very diverse community. After West Valley, I kind of moved.
We lost you.
Whoops, sorry. So I grew up in West Valley. I don't know if you guys caught that, but it's a very diverse community. So in high school, I moved out to Eagle Mountain, and there wasn't really a loss of or displacement. It was definitely displacement for me, just because the population out there is different. But yeah, that's my experience as a Tongan woman in Utah.
Hi, my name is Paolipikupaki. That's the full extent of my name. My pronouns are he, him, his. First generation Tongan American. One of Nia's aunts that she was talking about was my mom. They were born in Tonga, raised in Hawaii, then they moved to Salt Lake. They moved here for religious purposes. They built a church here. I'm a co-host on a podcast called Sorry About It. Basically, a Pacifica lens, growing up here in America, and then it's all about current events, Hollywood, music, and our outlook on it. We are affiliated also with UPSEC, and UPIC, which is a Pacific Islander non-profit organization that helps to promote leadership, health, and to close the gaps of disparity that are between us and the majority here in Utah. Born in West Valley and raised in Kearns. Nice to meet you guys.
Hi, I'm Marosa Oyangalalay, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and raised in Pomona, California, in SoCal. And I also identify as a Samoan Pacifica of the diaspora, as it's important to me to make that distinction in my own identity. And I listed some bullet points, just kind of give y'all an idea of my background. I was raised predominantly around Hispanics. And so I was often the only Samoan, even Pacific Islander, in most of the spaces I was a part of growing up. And so I did experience, I guess, an identity crisis, for lack of better terms, never really feeling Samoan enough. And even when I was able to be around more Pacifica peoples in college, I found that I also was not received because I was more American to them, or for whatever. So that kind of puts me in a sort of culture shock within my own culture. And so an important aspect that I like folks to know is that it's through community that I was truly able to embrace my identity. And so I have a couple of pictures of that featured here as well. Because without that, I wouldn't have been able to, or I would not be in the same place that I am today, as far as being proud of being Samoan and being proud of being raised here in the US. And I'm second-ish generation. And so trying to remain strong in the pride that I have for being Samoan, especially among my own people, is important to me. And to have that part of my identity not be dismissed just because I was raised here in America is also important. And as far as my work and my experience in Utah, I was able to return back to Utah to finish school at the University of Utah. And it was there really that I was able to thrive in community, where I was really embraced, which I'm so grateful for, by the community there, specifically working with OCA Utah, if y'all are familiar, which serves AAPI communities. Yeah, that's me. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
We are excited to have you.
So they kind of wanted me to go over the Pacific Islander versus AAPI. Pacific Islander is kind of just the more specific term referring to the islands in the Pacific. It kind of just refers to those who originate or live in the Pacific Islands. These are Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. The racial identities include Native Hawaiian. This is a very long list. Guamanian, Chamorro, Northern Mariana Islanders, Samoan, Fijians, Micronesians, Carolinian, Palauan, Papua New Guinean, Cosraean, Pohnpeian, Trukees, Yapese, Melanesian, Polynesian, Solomon Islanders, Tahitian, Tarawa Islanders, Tokelauan, and Tongan. The AAPI, that's the term that we're grouped in here in America. It refers to the Asian American and Pacific Islanders. It's more of a broad grouping for people of Asian and Pacific Island ancestry. This includes the racial identities that I listed before, and any people who trace their origins to the countries of the Asian continent. This includes China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and India. The biggest thing about this is there's a lot of debate going on with this grouping because it relates to the census and how we, as a country, divide up those funding and assistance. because it is a big grouping, it covers the largest areas in the world. It's over like 50 ethnicities, 200 different languages and dialects. And so, yeah, the plus side of that, because we're Pacific Islanders are a small minority, we do benefit from being with such a big continent with Asia because they are a more developed country. And so some people see the benefits to that. I'll let Marosa speak more on that.
Yeah, so I think the term originally was coined within the workings of the census. And I think since, of course, because we are grouped with such a big continent, that's a misrepresentation of our own statistics. And so funding is not accurately dispersed. And with that, it's also the conversation of disaggregating data and the push for that, especially in representation of such a small community. I mean, yeah. And I actually included a map here that is a decolonized view of our islands, given that the map typically visualizes the islands very dispersed and far away from each other. And that is that's what our quote highlights by the academic and Efeli Hau'ofa. We should not be defined by the smallest of our islands, but by the greatness of our ocean. And that to me is really important and really emulates this discussion about the connectedness of our islands. And that's why I really like this visual representation of the map, just showing how we are all connected, very closely connected by the ocean and not separated and divided because of the water. And anything else to add?
I think that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to talk about the separation of Samoa and Tonga now?
Oh, yeah. So we're kind of just focusing on Tonga and Samoa just because that's where we racially identify, but the history behind it, Tonga and Samoa are very similar in ways. We were united and then we separated. Bali, do you want to kind of touch on this? I think you're muted.
Yeah, so sorry. We're definitely connected in many ways, many more ways than not, especially within like the governments that were established there. Governments, as in main chiefs and then subgroups of chiefs. And that's where we get a lot of similarities in like dances, foods, language. It just shows how really connected we are more than we are different.
Yeah.
And a lot of the chiefs within our different islands were marrying their daughters off to other chiefs. And so that kept a lot of the ties amongst the Pacifica strong.
I just wanted to quickly add to follow up with that. Just this understanding that our ancestors are the most immaculate navigators. I think that's important to remember, is that's why we are connected to, is we were able to navigate the seas, or the sea and the ocean without like GPS. I'm using the stars and our indigenous ways, but I think that is important to highlight as far as like a more recognized intellectual aspect of our people and our ancestry as well.
Yeah, so some of the Tongan cultural origins, we included the dances. So the Taolunga is so a lot of Tongan and Samoan like words and dances, they're very similar. So anything that I might be saying, Marosa may repeat just because of the similarities. The dance that is most popular among the general views of Tonga is the Taolunga, and it's usually a solo dance done by a girl. The faha iula is when a group of them are performing the same dance. The cultural significance of the Taolunga is they're usually done at weddings or it's typically a wedding or any celebration, graduations, and we do whakapale, which is when we throw money, and it usually goes to who the night is for. So if it's a wedding, the whakapale will go to the couple that's getting married. The Taolunga Afi is just a different dance, the fire dance. Maulu'ulu is a sitting dance, and the Kailao is a warrior dance. Music, because Tongans are people of the island in general, they're really simple people. Instruments didn't come until missionaries came to the land. And so we rely a lot on singing. And I'm gonna pass this to Bali so we can kind of talk about current music in the Tongan scene.
So, in a lot of indigenous music, a lot of oral tradition was passed down, genealogy, and important events that happened within a lot of our history was passed down through music. We actually had a nose flute that is now, it's not very well known or popular. I don't know why we played with our nose and not our mouth, but more talent, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of the songs have been replaced by a lot of hymns and songs for Jesus, I guess. So a lot of the history and traditions have been lost through our music, and I place that on colonization. But I give kudos to a lot of the artists now going back to singing in our own language and just finding out the true, like the deeper meanings of what we sing, and finding out the culture, traditions, and genealogy that were passed down through the music. Current artists now kind of recycle the old traditional music, which is good because that's how traditions and culture is passed down.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with our language. So Tongan people were illiterate people. We never like wrote anything down. So our history was passed down by the word of mouth. We didn't have an official language until the 19th century. This is when missionaries came to the land and they kind of just wrote our spelling system and our language. And so a lot of the words in the Tongan language don't really translate to English. So this anga whakatonga, a lot of these words don't translate to English. These are more like feelings and experiences that we felt. Anga whakatonga is like the Tongan way of life. And so these are the 4 Tongan virtues in which like we kind of live by. The first being whakaapa. This is acknowledging and returning respect. This kind of goes into like our family is a big unit in the Tongan culture. It's just respecting your brothers and sisters and your parents, especially your elders. The next one is lototo. Lototo. This is humility, being open to learning, and this is evident in a person when they're teachable. Tauhi this relates to maintaining your relationships, keeping good relations with others. This is kind of where James Cook kind of coined the Friendly Islands term for Tongan people. And then the last one, Mamahi'i Me'a, which is loyalty, devotion, and passion. So yeah.
Okay, some on cultural dances and ceremonies. The first one that we wanted to talk about is the Taolunga Dance, also known as the money dance here in America. It's one of the most cherished art forms in Samoan Pacifica culture. And traditionally it's performed, it's a village, during a village ceremony, or the Ava ceremony, during times of like our, I guess, political discussion. Also, that's an American way to say it in reference to our Matai system that we govern under. And so it's also a warrior dance performed by both, by all people, usually by the high chief's daughter, which is the taupo, or his son, which is the manaya. And I have some visuals for that as well. However, here now the way that looks in the diaspora is we perform these during events, and it's usually performed by the person that the night is in recognition of, and that's, it's used, that's a more, I think it's used in a lot of ways, but I think most commonly that's how it's done now, like for graduations, weddings, church events, and so I think with this, it's important to understand its origins and how we use it, and it is a warrior dance, and we also use the knife, or the nifolti, to symbolize that as well, and to emulate grace and strength. And like I said, it's more loosely used here for different things, but I also want to highlight the importance, or highlight that there are groups still trying to hold the cultural, or more the originated way of performing the dance. And I have a couple pictures of my family, cousins, in their dance group, and at events that still perform the Samoan Siva, including the Taolunga, in a more traditional way, I guess. And then we have a short clip to play, and this is Brady Schwinky. She's also, she's in Utah, and she dances for Tausala, also a local Utah dance group. Yeah, go ahead and play it. It's a little slow. Okay, and then our next slide. I also wanted to highlight, just in light of our conversation being about cultural appropriation, and I think it's important to understand how our ceremonies and cultural origins look here in the US, and this is also through my experience as well, my lived experience, and how we try to sustain our culture here, and how I think the conversation also needs to be discussed as far as influence of colonization and Christianity, because I think that there's often sort of a controversial discussion of like what's the right or wrong way to do things, including the Taolunga, and perform certain Samoan cultural ceremonies, and I highlighted that question: what is the proper Samoan protocol for things? And I think that's a common discussion that's being had to this day, and like on social media, like everyone kind of trying to chime in on that. And then also, I think it's important to understand how our culture is evolving versus the cultural origins. So kind of that understanding, and like sort of the nuanced views that happen because of that, because of colonization, and like because of how we are trying to sustain culture, and understanding that things have evolved, but also at the root of it, it's trying to remain close to our origins and how things are typically or properly being performed. But yeah, and so I included a picture of my auntie. She's performing the Taolunga in the church chapel, which I feel like also can resonate in Utah as far as the LDS church, and where a lot of our events happen in the cultural hall. And I think that's very, it's a really good visual of of us maintaining and sustaining our culture through colonization and through Christianity, performing the Taolunga and our traditional dances wherever and whenever, and to still hold our mana or Pacifica strength. And then I also included a short clip of my grandma, and this is her, my late grandma, performing the Taolunga, and I think this particular experience is also a good visual. This is the when she was in there, my family was in California, but they had recently, she came straight from Samoa, so I love that this visual kind of emulates that whole trying to sustain our culture and still remaining who we are. I think the sound is working. It's okay. But yeah, this is her performing it. And I thought it would be really good to include. And this is just kind of how we do things here now in America and how we still show up and like as proud Samoans as well in every space that we're in.
We play it with the sound. I was on
mute. Yeah, you're okay. Also continued. Another thing that I think is important in relation to our cultural ceremonies is our Samoan language and how we try to maintain that as well here in the diaspora, which is, I left a quote there by Lefaoli Dion Ineri, who studies and I believe a doctoral student here in America, Samoan language. And his quote is, understanding Samoan language as a treasure or a meosina, and that it's the foundation of our sacred knowledge systems, and how important it is if we're talking about sustaining language and cultivating it here, specifically here in the US, how important it is to maintain it and to continue. I think we suffered a loss of it because of assimilation and our way of assimilating and sort of surviving really here in the diaspora was to speak English and prioritize the English language. And with that, it's erased our Samoan language in many households. And so with that, there's a lot of folks out here and even in communities still trying to retain that and sort of revive it in a way. I think there's a stat that I read that in 3 generations, our language could be lost here. And to me, that is really scary. And because it's like the quote says, it is the foundation of our sacred knowledge systems. And we are, our histories are told orally. And so to be able to understand and not stray far from our roots, our language it's critical that we maintain our language. And like I said, I'm like second-ish generation and I'm not fluent. I wasn't taught Samoan. And so it's sort of these community efforts that I look to and upon my own research as well, but even really just these community efforts that are going to help the survival of our language here. And I listed a couple specifically in Utah. There's Sa'ili, and it's a Samoan Integrated Language Initiative that is used to teach the Samoan language, and it's also they were also able to start actual formal classes at the University of Utah as well. So I think it's things like that that is going to help sustain our language. And speaking in particular to Utah, like this work is happening, and I think that it's important to understand that it's a priority for our people and to participate in what we have if it is available and accessible to us.
Okay, so one thing that we really wanted to touch on with the cultural appropriation within the Pacific Islander community was tattoos. So in Tonga, tattoos were an art. They were a rite of passage for warriors, and they carried profound social and cultural significance. The history behind it was that it was traditionally used as a marker of a person's identity and their role in a community. Nearly all men were tattooed, and this, I want to say this is back in like 875 AD. For Tongan warriors, it would be from the knees to the waist. It was typical for men to have tattoos, but some women would, but it would always just be limited to the arms. So that picture on the bottom right, that's actually the only account that we have of Tongan tattoos. Once the Tonga adopted Christianity into the land, it was outlawed by the king, and that picture was drawn by Captain Dumont d'Urville's. I think that's a French last name, but yeah. Once we underwent religious reform, a lot of the ancient Tongan religion was erased from Tongan history. And so that is kind of my piece on that. I think Bali had more on
The beauty of Tao is what it's called in Tongan, is that there was a lot of history and generational traditions that was passed down through the tattoos also. And if you go throughout the different islands, you can tell the different markings of people, just because they were all different outlooks. Some could mean stars, some could mean the animals that represented, or even special places that were brought to, like from that movie Moana, Maui and Builoto are ancient gods. They were passed through Tao. And then, like Sina said, when religion came into, or Western religion came into play, everything was just outlawed after that. There's a huge revival going on right now. The Malu, which is the bottom right picture, or the bottom left picture for women, and then the Be'a, which is the bottom right for men, it used to be practiced within the Tongans history also. So right now I'm part of a Talanoa group, which is based here in Utah. Well, a lot of the Talanoa is done within the Moana. People from New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii here, talking about the revival and what it would look like if the Peka, which is the bottom right, the Tongan version, it's a bat, which is indigenous to Tonga, the fruit bat, wrapped around your body, and then your traditions and your genealogy written on. At the top of the bat would be a boat. So it's called the Ta'avaka, or the Peka, and that's you and your vessel, and everything that flows on underneath is the Peka. And it's different for other cultures, such as the man with the tattoos on his face, which is the Maoris or New Zealand, and also the Hawaiians, I believe, also have markings on their face. I'll pass it to Marosa.
Just to follow up, I think they kind of said everything really well. And we had, like they mentioned, we also have the Samoan Tatao, and which the word originated from Samoa, or in Samoa, which I think is defined as the tapping from the tools that we use to or like the indigenous way that we did our tattooing. But yeah, I second everything they said. I think understanding that everything is our islands are connected. It's very similar. The meanings of everything definitely translate all around.
It seems very intentional too, because I know there are so many people that just get these patterns and they have no idea that like every line has a meaning to it. So remember that the next time you see somebody at the gym with one of these tattoos on, ask them if they know the meaning.
Oh, is it me? Okay. I think so. These are also things that we see often are the lays, especially at graduations now. However, traditionally in the Pacifica cultures, we use this as a gift. Our lay making as a gift, especially in regards to here. Like at graduations, it's a gift for those that have graduated, and I'm just referring to the visuals here. And they're handmade also from the candy lays. Those are handmade with the food, those are handmade, and also with the flowers, and they're made freshly as well. And I think that's important to mention. I don't need it. Did you want to chime in more about the lays? Or I think you're muted.
Yeah, just another thing about the lays, like they're really, like, from what you see, these are things that like we have around that are available to us. And so it's just a lot of our culture is using what we have, what is available to us. Candy is an easy commodity to find, and so it's just our way of giving to and celebrating the person that we're giving it to.
Did you say something about these not being like allowed anymore in some places?
Yeah, so that person in the picture actually is my cousin. His name is Fina. He graduated from Westlake in Eagle Mountain, and he was wearing, so underneath he was wearing his dubenu, which is, we typically wear those to church. He was also wearing the leis, and they asked him to take off his leis before walking across graduation. I can't imagine taking all of that off right before walking across the stage. And so just another example of like erasure of our culture here in the mainland, I guess. But yeah. And then again, so now we're moving on to food and drinks. Again, with like Polynesian culture in general, a lot of we are people that just use what's available to us. So a lot of our food and dishes contain ingredients that are available to the land. We included poke in here. The Tongan equivalent is ota. It's typically raw fish served with rice, vegetable, and sauces. The popularity of poke in Hawaii is equivalent to like the popularity of pizza in New York or Chicago. Here in Utah, Tongan food has definitely become more popular, especially otai, mobetas, things like that. But the biggest thing is Gava. So to understand Gava, the cultural significance of that, you have to understand the ancient Tongan religion. By the first millennium, the island of Tonga was inhabited by voyagers of Western Polynesia. They settled the island and they formed a basic social organization. What we talked about earlier, the chiefdoms. It consisted of high chiefs, low chiefs, warriors, craftsmen, and common farmers. The first supreme chief of Tonga was called the Tui Tonga. This is just like a higher god. His name was Ahu Etu. He was son of an earthly woman and a god. The Tui Tonga and his fishermen went fishing one day, and they went ashore to an island to find a place to sleep and something to eat. On this island, they met a couple who had only one daughter. And Tonga is a land that's barren. They don't have a lot of resources to profit off of. So what this couple did was they sacrificed their daughter for the tuitonga and a umu, which is like an earth oven. That's how we cook a lot of our dishes. And so once the tuitonga learned of the sacrifice, he honored the couple and the daughter, naming the umu Kava. And the next day, the miraculous root grew in what we know to be Kava. So Kava is like a root. It has intoxicating properties in it. So it's kind of, I don't know if it is alcohol, but it has the same effects of alcohol. It serves as a ceremonial centerpiece. There's a ceremony that goes along with it. In the ancient days, it was always performed when chiefs received their titles, or now it's used during weddings, welcoming visitors. When I think it was Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, when they came, they did the ceremony in Tonga. As we've transitioned into American society, it's turned more into a social thing. And so now we are seeing the introduction of galapus in American society, and kava bars, which is kind of moderated to capitalize on kava. And I'll let Bali talk about that. So,
So I recently, Kava was bad growing up because I grew up LDS, which I'm not anymore, but it was so stigmatized because actions of the men kind of stigmatized everything in it. But Kava, I'll take back what Nia was saying. It's not like alcohol because it's not fermented, but it's just a root that is ground up, dried out, ground up, and then sifted through something we call a sieve. So it's kind of like cheesecloth, where you keep the particles, and everything that's inside is what's called kava. But it's lactones, which is kind of a relaxing, has a relaxing effect. It's still kind of, it could alter your mood, but it was just served amongst all the like visitors and all the high chiefs, where people would come around and they would have potalano, which is just a conversation of governments, what needs to be done, like wars coming up. Also, if you had a son or a daughter, how to combine different tribes together and bring the lands. But now, kava is being used, like Sinia was saying, for a lot of medicinal use. So I know that a lot of China is led throughout the Pacific and is taking a lot of the kava root and using it for medicinal purposes because it helps with insomnia, with like different stress reliefs. And so they're, I forgot what the word is, but they take it for pennies on, on the dollar, and then they sell it to pharmaceutical companies for like huge profits. And that comes to us here in America. I don't know if they do it in other, like Australia and New Zealand, but we now have kava bars, where I know a lot of them are not owned by Pacifica people. There was even an instance in Florida where a white man was trying to patent the word kava for his use only. And that's part of I think why this conversation is important, because the white man who visited the islands and had kava decided that he should have rights to it because he was the first to introduce it in Florida. The there's a lot of Pacifica owners now. Like there are like 6 bars here in Utah now. They're all owned by Pacifica people, which I think is a step forward in regaining what's ours. A lot of, well, the Kava bars evolved also from kalapus, which are like certain clubs that are held within people's homes, where people get together and talk about community, how to support each other, and just other significant social aspects that need to be talked about.
And Marosa, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add about food.
Yeah, I think just to follow up on what both of them have mentioned altogether and what it looks like here for us now, food is just a way of connecting us all again, like this idea of staying connected and rooted. We see all of these translated also through food, and like how Talanoa happens is with food as well. I think that happens very well through that too. And so even with Kava as it being sort of a social thing, it's also a way that we can gather and share through story, which is a lot of what we do originally, and speaks to how our histories have always been told. So I wanted to include that.
Okay. So the paradise trope, sorry. So the paradise trope kind of refers to the idea that the visual representations and narrative account of the Pacific Islands establish them as a paradise. Anytime you see anything in relation to Pacific, I think the automatic thought is vacation. It just the paradise trope cultivates a foreign desire that motivate and enable the possession of indigenous landscape. A lot of tourism campaigns and media representations of the islands offer visions of paradise that function as a playground for white people. This has been happening since James Cook. His visual representations always included the hula girl representation, which directly affects Polynesian women, because attached to the desire of these lands is the women who inhabit the landscapes. That's where we get the hula girl representation. As a result of the paradise trope, we have tiki parties, luau's, tiki bars. I think a real world example of our islands being used as like this paradise was the Polynesian Cultural Center. This is just a place. So the Polynesian Cultural Center is in Hawaii. They embrace the different islands and kind of our cultures, our different dances that we do. My grandma actually used to work at the PCC along with her sisters, one of Bali's moms, and they were working there for $2 an hour. And so it's just kind of crazy to hear, because that's not a living wage at all. And so it's kind of crazy to see how we have these people who claim to embrace our culture, and we're just working and not even a living wage. So yeah, if anyone wanted to add in what they...
I think it's important to note that the Polynesian Cultural Center is directly affiliated with the LDS Church and the BYU Hawaii institution. And so that goes with the appropriation of fetishizing a lot of the Polynesian cultures or the Pacifica Islands in and of itself, and going along with the living wages. Pacifica people that go there still make the minimum wage as students, which is like $9 an hour.
Mhm.
In Hawaii, where housing is going for millions of dollars. So there's no real kickback to the community because, like you said, they're just giving them pennies
Yeah.
for the
Um,
million.
the environmental and the economic and social effects of like the paradise trope that is like constantly perpetuated directly affects like the people who are living on these islands. Prices of home have skyrocketed. One big thing was COVID-19. We had to shut our borders in Tonga, which directly affected a lot of the imports and just a big loss economically for our people, which is so crazy because the ideas surrounding COVID here in Utah, it's a big debate. And it's just, for me, I learned a lot about my own people. And one big thing was we are people of agriculture and science. And so just to see the transition of beliefs from the islands not completely transfer over to the people now because we are in an American society, that was just food for thought. So Marosa, you can add in anything that you wanted to.
Just to follow up, I added in the chat. I like to reference the piece by Dr. Haunani K. Trust on the lovely hula hands on corporate tourism and the prostitution of Hawaiian culture. And to me, I love her reference of Hawaii as a prostitute, the island being her reference to that to me is very strong. And I would recommend that piece. Just, I think that across the board of Pacifica can be applied as far as how commodification and has sort of been linked to this paradise trope and the harm it's doing to our islands, especially Hawaii, who I think is arguably the most colonized island in Pacifica now. And also I wanted to mention the blood quantum that goes into that. Who's Hawaiian enough to have land, and I think that also plays a big part as well. And just really giving the land and back to the indigenous people and having it remain there and being able to survive and really even live on the land itself. So.
Okay, so religion and culture go hand in hand in most societies. I think for Tongans, there isn't a separation of the two. Tonga is very Christian. It's a very religious country. We have a Tongan seal. I should have included it, but on the Tongan seal it says "Koe otua mo Tonga ko hoku tofia." This translates to God and Tonga are my inheritance. I included the picture of the Tongan flag on there. It's a direct reference to Christ. The cross is for the cross of Christ, and the Tongan flag is red for the blood of Christ. Some of the things we wanted to speak on and that we've kind of mentioned was white saviorism. So what white saviorism is, those who work from the assumption that they know what's best for people of color. They believe it's their responsibility to support and uplift communities of color in their own country or somewhere else, because people of color lack the resources, willpower, and intelligence to do it themselves. It kind of just goes back to what we talked about with the tattoos. Once Tonga underwent that religious reform and adopted Christianity, a lot of people don't know this, but Tonga had an ancient religion that we believed in, which was that D.I.V.A story. And so in order for Tonga to become legit, they adopted Christianity And so that's kind of where our erasure of culture came from. I know Bali had a story to share, so I'll pass it on to him.
Oh, it's just with the whole white saviorism Christianity. It basically changed a lot of the culture. So a lot of the culture that we see now just went hand in hand with like the religion that is dominant, which is Christianity. And so it's I'm very happy that a lot of these conversations are happening now amongst the us living outside of the diaspora. Simply because it has us questioning whether certain things were put in place because of religion, or it's because it was written in a lens of a white perspective or a religious perspective that we continue to follow. And a lot of Christianity had brought that to the island, where we forget that the fahu system that we have, which is the respect that we give to our father's oldest sisters, who hold rank in any position that or any event that they come into. Like if it was an event that I was holding for my daughter or my son, my oldest sister would hold rank over this event that we're having, and gifts and stuff would be given to her and she would be acknowledged as that. But even that system had come from Tuipulotu, from the ancient gods, and that's still practiced today. But Christianity has definitely made its way to get rid of some of those things and kind of stigmatized a lot of what was. Kava being another one of those traditions. I served in LDS mission and I loved it, but I hated almost every minute of it. Simply because I was serving a Tongan mission. And in America, there's only 2 languages that have a stake or group of languages, which is the Hispanic, Spanish, and then Tongan. We're the only ones that have stakes outside of our own countries. And so when I asked the question, if I'm serving a Tongan mission, why aren't there more Tongan representation? I was the only Tongan person there on my mission. And my mission president had told me that they were going to phase out all language wards because the the religion of God is not Tongan, but it's pretty much white English. And that turned me off from that whole experience. So the whole white saviorism definitely plays a big role in everything that we do here in Utah also, because it's just the dominant religion here.
Good for this slide?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Media representation. I think what we wanted to focus on here is are the narratives that our people, the narratives that are told of our people, and the dominant narratives actually here, especially here in the diaspora, which include, I think, for example, The Rock, our athleticism, especially as it relates to football. And then even, I think we have here the movie industry, the entertainment industry, as far as like movies, including Lilo and Stitch and Moana, and sort of how those are gearing or guiding the understanding of Pacifica representation, and then how those more dominant narratives are erasing true narratives of our people, and deeming other aspects of us invisible, and also supporting this idea of us as happy natives, for example. And what I see primarily is just as athletes. And that the origins of those understandings, I think, are a lot bigger than we have time for. And so I'll try and add resources here. However, just kind of trying to divest from those understandings, and then it leaves us being, for example, myself as a Samoan woman, having to disrupt those narratives in every space that I'm a part of, and sort of prove myself and kind of work my way out of what others think that we're supposed to be. And then once we are able, or even if we attempt to disrupt that idea, we receive backlash for that, or not given the platform to do so even. And so I think that it's important to kind of divest, like I said, from this understanding of us just what the representation is. And even more importantly, for our own people as a community, I think it's especially important for us to also divest from these ideas ourselves, understanding that we come from we have the capability and potential to be so much more, not to dismiss those that are here now, or those that have, I guess, a more celebrity representation of us, but to see more for ourselves, because we are far more than that. And yeah, did anyone else have anything specifically to say?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, most of our people are represented through sports here in America. I know that in Utah, my brothers, they're big, like, we're probably like the only Tongan. I mean, there's like a big community of Tongans here in Utah that are in sports, but it like directly hits home. We included a picture of the haka. I know the haka is always used here in Utah, especially on the football teams, where majority of the team are white boys, and then there's probably like 4 polys on there, and then they're not even, because the haka is really from New Zealand, and majority of the polys out here are Samoan and Tongan. And so I think people just don't realize that we are different islands and we have different war chants, because that's what the haka is a war chant used from warriors. The Tongan equivalent, or the Tongan war chant, is called the Sipitao. But yeah, the biggest representation that polys have are in America is sports. And so kind of what we wanted to touch on was how Pacific Islanders are supported outside of sports. There's a direct pipeline from the NFL, the sports pipeline, from college to the NFL. And a lot of these kids go into college taking on debt, and leaving not knowing how to either pay them off if they don't make it to the NFL, or even like selecting a correct major, or having support in mental health, because a lot of us are immigrants. A lot of us come from backgrounds where we don't have the financial resources to deal with just some of the trials that we go through and taking on a new environment. But yeah, did anybody else have anything to add?
I was thinking, especially like in the context of the NFL football players, they have the financial resources, but they don't have nobody supporting them within that, and their body has been used and commodified in a way that doesn't support their mental health and doesn't support them gaining access to education and stuff like that. So it's very systemic for sure.
Yes, and just to add on to that, even locally, Utah is predominantly, like Salt Lake County has a huge population of Polynesians, Samoan, Tongan, whatever it may be, but we see a lack of representation in the media, where, you know, a lot of us are coined as problematic. Also, going back to like COVID-19, the governor had a statement interpreted from English into Tongan, and the person that she chose had no background in speaking Tongan. She was born and raised here, and so she didn't do her due diligence in knowing that there's a whole organization out there that is there to help translate for the people here. But she just didn't, do her due diligence, chose a random person, and then there was a lot of backlash because a lot of the things that were translated weren't even the correct translation. So there's a lot of misinformation, misrepresentation, which coming into like a deadly disease such as COVID-19, it's important that we have the right resources.
So for the slide, we kind of want to talk about colorism and anti-Blackness that within the Pacific Islander community. I think like this is just, it's so deep rooted in our culture that it just like flies over our head. I included pictures of past Miss Heilala winners, which is a pageant that goes on in Tonga. A lot of our beauty standards are Eurocentric. And so growing up, I was always told not to go outside, stay out in the sun before you get Black. And so even like some of our words are derogatory out here. Our words for uliuli, or for Black people, is uliuli. I know Samoans say meuli. Uli itself is just dirty. And so when you think about when we're talking about Black people and we're calling people these, it is just like a translation. It doesn't directly, it's just a translation of our word, but because we've like normalized that, I think it's just something for our community to think about. And another picture that I included there was our Tongan flag bearer, and this is at the Olympics. Tonga is a land that has a lot of exposure to the sun, and so a lot of our representations of Tongan people are inaccurate representations, and these are coming from our own people. Like these Heilala winners are girls, light skin, petite bodies, smaller noses, and that's kind of the exact opposite of what we are. Our Tongan flag bearer is someone of a physique that you don't normally see in Tongan men. And so, that's kind of what we're seeing in our day-to-day representation.
Yeah, can I quickly add? I just wanted to add on also understanding the roots of anti-Blackness in our culture, just the importance of the origins that have made it this way. I think it's a constant conversation of understanding our people's proximity to whiteness always, and understanding even in the very division of our islands, Polynesia, Melanesia, Micronesia, that was given, that's our colonized names. And I know that a lot of Pacifica activists and folks in the work, in community work to divest from using that language and using other terms, because those were terms given to us by colonizers. For instance, Melanesia, that section of the islands, literally that was named literally because of the darker skinned peoples that live there. And so there's no actual, like, I guess for a US understanding, like academic term to even really prove some sort of intellectual understanding of why we're divided this way, other than the reign of white supremacy. And so I think that that's a conversation that needs to be learned and continues needs to be continued to be had among our Pacifico folks to understand how deeply rooted that is, literally from going back to how we were divided, to in order to kind of, like I said, divest and like work away, or pretty much don't like not participate and perpetuate anti-Blackness anymore. And I think it's until we do that is where we'll see true like solidarity even with our Black community as well. And it just not, as far as not doing it anymore, supporting that understanding I think is important.
And just to add on, like what she said with like not, with there not being any academia on it, I think the islands are just such a minority. Like we don't even really have like a lot of these things that I pulled into our slides and our history. These are all things I learned from my grandma, and like learning from, and it just goes back to us being like illiterate people. We don't even have like the research done for us to even understand like the ways we perpetuate these ideas. And so, yeah.
I think important is there's a lot of individuals who are in higher education who are working on dismantling a lot of that, which I give kudos to. One of the main ones that I know, he's Tongan, and I think he lives in Hawaii, but his name is D.I.V.A. And he's doing a lot of research within the islands to try to dismantle all of the grouping of Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia. I'll touch on homophobia and transphobia really quick. I think that just came about with colonization also, because from as far as I know, back in the islands, there's been a pageant called Miss Galaxy. Well, in Tonga, it's called Miss Galaxy, and it's for whakaleitis, which is also stigmatized, which a lot of them just call themselves leitis now. But they were the trans women, or what is it called when cross-dress?
Oh, drag queen.
A drag queen pageant. And that was performed throughout Tonga, in Tonga, Nuku'alofa, which is the capital. Also, there's been the term in Samoa, I don't know if Marosa wants to talk about it, but it's the fa'afafine, third gender that they speak of, was widely accepted throughout the Pacifica. But I think now that Christianity has a hold on a lot of what we say and do, it's kind of been demonized.
Yeah, I think it's important, just to briefly touch on it, to understand, especially across the Pacifica, that the third gender is recognized and has always been recognized, sort of like you mentioned with the Leitis, and in Samoan the Fa'afafine, and then in Hawaiians, or with Hawaiians the I'm blinking, but all to say that third genders were not dismissed, and they were a part of our forms of life pre-colonization, just like Bale has mentioned, all of those things. So I think that with that understanding, like I said, just this kind of continuous push to divest from these things and from these colonial ideals and Eurocentric and Western ideals, we'll understand that if you are, that our people knew those things, these were already indigenous understandings of our people. These are not new concepts. To our people, like I said, we already recognize our third genders. And so it's just a matter of, especially in the diaspora, deconstructing those ideas and unlearning, really unlearning all of those things. Because at the root of it, and if you go back to like our origin stories and like our oral histories, I mean, while it's not language in the same way that we would say it now, as far as homophobia and transphobia. Our folks of all genders were mentioned, and also mentioned always and like represented on like more visible platforms and accepted in our community.
On the slide on here is a Black trans Samoan and Tongan mixed woman. She talks a lot about the homosexuality and the homophobia and transphobia that's been displayed in the Black community, and how that's been, when she talks about her Black identity, she feels more embraced in her Polynesian community, specifically with her trans identity, because they've always represented the practice of Indigenous with the third gender. So I'm just gonna put in the YouTube source so you guys can look at this podcast documentary that I was fortunate enough to work with here in the Bay Area, the Kava Club, which is a space for Polynesian stories, but we'll move on.
Okay, so this kind of just ties back to what we talked about earlier with the cross-cultural appropriation and how we see it in our Pacific Island community. We kind of included, I think her name was Hyrie, and her use of braids in her Instagram post. I didn't see what she said about it, but if anyone wants to briefly go over it.
I wish the caption was there, but basically what she said was how it was a form of cultural appreciation, and that she was open to have conversation. She had her direct messages open for folks to genuinely have a conversation about why she wore the braids and how she supports the Black community, which is a way that should be embraced pertaining to me as a Black woman. It should fall into appreciation instead of appropriation. But when our culture is appropriated, when negative connotations of our hair is displayed as nappy, or it discriminates us where in schools or in workplace, those experiences pertain specifically to us, but then our body is used as a commodity or used as a costume or used just as a trend. And those folks that are not Black, they usually white folks, not so much BIPOC folks, don't get discriminated against. But just to know that the origins, the traditions of braiding falls back into slavery. It traces straight into the African nations of slavery, which if you were here for our Black cultural appropriation, we dove deep into. But here I want to show that it's a cross-cultural appropriation, but it can turn into appreciation, which brings a positive connotation to it.
Marosa had a really good point. So I think, what I understand with the music scene of the Pacific Island community, we have like our own traditional music, but one that has become popularized among Pacific Island is island reggae. And this is something that I learned from Marosa that I thought she had a really good point on, was that we kind of forget that reggae comes from Black people. And so I'll let Marosa do it because I just love the way that she put it.
Yeah, I'll just quickly describe what I was saying, just in reference to island reggae. And then I think just as far as groups like the Common Kings, who have been more mainstream now, and their lack of acknowledgement to the roots and origins of reggae, and understanding that they are from Caribbean and African origins, and even not even just understanding, but just like I said, acknowledging that and being vocal in Black movements. We have not seen that happen from very mainstream island reggae artists. And so that's just a point that I wanted to make, especially like we touched a lot about anti-Blackness. And I think the overall understanding here, especially with our people and having that type of platform in the media and entertainment industry, it's important that we understand and recognize these things and acknowledge them, and are participating in and standing in solidarity with Black movements, especially. And those are ways that we can divest from white supremacy and truly liberate each other. And so, and small acts also, I don't want to say that's like the end all be all, but just very, to me, simple acts to do. When there's a movement going on, you support it. And I think that in social media, I don't know if y'all have seen it, there was pushback from various island reggae artists as far as showing up for and representing the Black movement. They did not want to. And so it's not funny, I'm sorry, that's more of a sarcastic work or laugh, but yeah, they just were not showing up in that way. And so I thought that was important to highlight as far as cross-cultural appropriation goes.
I also included just a picture of a Tongan rapper. I think that's like the biggest thing that I saw on my end was like a lot of these artists, they are quick to be part of these I guess music industries that are dominantly came from Black people. And so, and it the lack of support for Black movements and how that relates to our experiences in this country. I know another thing that we wanted to touch on was the use of the N-word in the Pacific Islander community. We and Marosa kind of talked about it. I know for my personal experience, I grew up saying it. I didn't know until high school that it was a racial slur. Growing up in West Valley, it's predominantly like Mexicans and whites. And so I think this is like a perfect example of like linguistic assimilation. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's just when two neighboring groups of people influence each other's way of speaking. And so I grew up saying it like to people that I knew, or like people in my family, not even knowing that this was something derogatory or with like racial prejudice. And so I think it's important for our people to like recognize that it's derogatory. If anybody else wants to add into that.
I think a lot of it, first of all, let me say we do benefit a lot from the Black community because we're not Black, but we're not white. So we can kind of assimilate better into whatever situations we're in, which is not the same for the Black community. So I know a lot of us like to pick and choose, like from the Black community or from the white community, what we want to follow. But something to look at perspective. Coming in and migrating here, a lot of the Polynesian community or Pacifica communities, they had come through LA or San Francisco, which is predominantly Black. And like you said, the proximity. And so I think just the lack of education and also just the
I feel like the lack of awareness too.
Yeah.
Just because, like how he said earlier, the anti-Blackness is so like deeply rooted within us that, or in our culture, that we just, it's like subconscious, I feel.
Right.
And to your point, Polly, I feel like in those areas too, some of the weight is on the Black people who are giving the pass or who are looking at you as a brother and are saying like, oh no, it's okay, because that that's what I've heard a lot from a lot of Pacifica people that did tell me, well, I came here from Cali, or like I'm from Rose Park, I'm from West Valley, and like people told me that it was okay and that I was one with them. So I think it's just like always pointing out that awareness. And I always encourage people that are not a part of the Black community to speak up and say something and educate them as well. I've heard people say that that's hard because they've been ostracized. You're not a part of this community. You don't have a say, but it's so powerful if you yourself could reach out and say, actually, well, I'm not Black, so I probably shouldn't say that. But I think it can definitely go both ways too. And we see Black people getting tribal tattoos too. So just spreading that awareness and actively seeking in solidarity, like you said, Marosa, with different communities of color, I think is some of the best things that we can do.
Yeah, I think it's also just to take note that not every Black person or person of color feels the same way when it comes to prejudices and issues of racism. Specifically with the N-word, I always would tell all my BIPOC folks, non-BIPOC folks, Black, non-Black, that I'm probably going to be the only Black person in Utah that's going to educate you on this. But if you go to different hoods, I'm going to be real with you, we go to different areas, you can get killed for that. Like, I'm just going to be real with you. So it's important that with our coping mechanisms with racism, you can be tired, you can be exhausted, be angry, you can be ready to fight, you can be ready to kill. So it's just important to keep note of that, for the safety and security and the building of solidarity that we need in order to strive and break down white supremacy.
Right. Hey. We'll end on the positive note here before I wrap it up.
So one thing that really came to mind for me, Janessa asked me, what does our culture still have that is strong? One thing that I learned from this whole opportunity was kind of just that I loved about like the Tongan community and the Polynesian community in general is it relies a lot on the community. Kava was the biggest thing. One thing that I learned from Kava and studying it was the Galapus and how they come together to fundraise for people in our community. And I think that was the beautiful thing about everything said today, was that although we are small islands, we definitely do consistently come through when we work together as one. And so just learning about how we were separated from the rest of our Polynesians and then coming back together to America and being part of the melting pot of cultures. I love that we had these conversations because learning that we were people of oral history, a lot of our history was lost. And I think as a community, if we instill those values that we set way back in the day, then it's definitely going to be work, but we can definitely revive what was lost. So that's how I feel at the end of this. If anyone else wanted to add, they can go ahead.
Sorry, I was on mute. But something positive that I got out of this whole interaction. Thank you, D.I.V.A, for hosting. Ladies, it's always got to be the women that pave the way, and it's definitely in the Pacific community. I love to see it. I love the inclusion, and I love that that conversations are being had, because if not, who else? We're learning from other people's perspectives and their different lenses. So I'm happy for conversations that are happening. Through those conversations, there's revival of practices, of traditions that are being lost. Even our community seeing fit for us to have educational institutions built like Mana and Pacific Heritage for our young kids to learn our cultures, our dances, and our languages. So I appreciate everything you're doing. Everything evolves from conversation, and I appreciate it.
Just want to echo everyone else in thanking D.I.V.A for the opportunity to have this conversation, and also Nia and Bali for working with y'all in representing our Pacifica community. It's again, like I said, echoing everything they said. This work is happening all around us. I also want to also highlight that this, like, specific to the Pacifica community, there's so much going on in Utah. And if you are in Utah, there's so many ways you can tap in with our culture. And I mean, now if this is your first time in community, now you have folks that you can engage with here, and it's as simple as that, because the work is going on, and the only way I see our cultures surviving is through Taolunga and through community. And so that's what I'd like to end with. Thank you.
Yay. I always like to just come back to the group for Q&A. But I want to take the time now to thank you all for giving us your time, for working through your trauma and putting yourself on the line to educate us. It really means a lot. I want to tell all of our guests here today to go to our Instagram, follow all of them right now. I always say the best way you can support is putting your money where your mouth is. Donate to these organizations, show up to these conversations, and please speak out. When you see something, say something. If you have to ask yourself or have that little initial thought in your head, should I be doing? No, that means you shouldn't do it. And yeah, thank y'all for being here. Let's move on to some of these questions. There were a lot of good ones. So I'll let Mayola start asking them to our panelists.
So the first question, the word Pacifica people is fairly new to me. Is the use of Polynesian as shortened Pali not appropriate or accurate anymore, specifically when used by white people?
I would say that Pacifica is probably a more accurate term. Polynesia just kind of refers to the general map, like what it says on the map. And so Polynesia just really refers to the Latin roots of the word. Poly is just many and Nesia is land. And so, yeah.
It also creates kind of a hierarchy of, oh no, I'm not Melanesian, I'm Polynesian, you know. Mm-hmm. So Pacifica is something we're pushing now. People love the ocean.
Yeah.
And that's preferred over Pacific Islanders too, correct?
Yes. It's the indigenous term, I would say now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are we good on this question? I'm sorry, folks. This person left the Zoom, and I'm sorry if this triggers y'all, but it's important for us to break it down. Have you experienced your language being mimicked by non-PI folks in predominantly white spaces?
Kind of. I know the word toko is like been used, like thrown around a lot in high school. I haven't seen it in like academia or like media. What would you guys say?
I say yes. My time in Utah or even here randomly. And usually I want it to be honest, like it's usually with those that have served in Samoa in the church and that feel that connection to their closeness to Samoans and know the language. The first word to me is talofa, and like I said, I don't speak it. And so where it's harmful for me is that it follows up with, oh, you don't speak the language? Or why don't you speak it? Have you been there? No, my ancestors had come here because you colonized our island. Just being funny. But no, that's usually the conversation. And like I said, it becomes harmful in that way when there's this assumption and dismissal of whiteness, a white occupation and imperialism, all those things, all the isms of our islands. That's where it's harmful for me personally.
I'm pretty small in stature also. I'm like 5'10". I'm 260 pounds, but I'm really small compared to a lot of Pacifica people in general, through white people's eyes, you know? And so they're always asking me, are you half Tongan, half something? So in that way, it's harmful too. And a lot of the times where it's kind of stupid, I grew up dancing in a group at different luau's, and I kind of felt like a, you know, a monkey wearing a tutu dancing in front of people, right? Because they would ask me questions about the different islands that I'm dancing and performing as, and I had no experience, no, you know, I had no reason why I should have been performing what I was performing. But I feel like what happens is, like the tattoo, which is a big one that I want to touch on, it kind of goes to the highest bidder and how much people are willing to sell themselves to, you know, to be put on parade.
I've definitely heard people mimicking the native language multiple times, like in high school and stuff. Like if they saw a Pacifica person, they're like, oh, is their name Alululu? Like, and just being really disrespectful. So I've heard it.
I used just being introduced in elementary, like the teacher would ask me for like a short introduction, and I would say, hi, my name is Pauli, and they would call me Pauli, right? When I would try to correct them, they would say, oh, so it's Pauli in English. I'm like, no, it's not an English name. Because my parents, when they were filling out the birth certificate, they didn't fill out the whole name, but my whole life I was called Pauliasi, which is my grandfather's name. So a lot of that is kind of harmful, because then a lot of kids growing up become embarrassed to embrace the culture, because at such a young age, they've experienced trauma through that.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing with me. Everybody mostly knows me as Nia, but the actual pronunciation of the shortened version is Nia, but my full name is Sinia. And so I've always just gone by Nia, and I just never even thought about like that. So
yeah, I think just to follow up, that's a really good concept to talk about, is also our names. Recently, just a brief story background, like recently my last name is Oyangalalay, and I have a cousin that is the quarterback at Clemson University, and so our last name is it's quickly been represented across the media. And so there was a segment on ESPN where they teased the difficulty of pronouncing our last name. And so I was on a Twitter war with folks from who knows where about the importance of pronouncing our last name correctly, or just don't say it at all, please. And that's my main thing. Was they took the time, ESPN took the time to produce a segment about it, which was so unnecessary. My cousin is amazing and talented. However, that's why I'm saying there's just like, what was the need to produce something about the difficult time you have pronouncing my last name? And so I think, like I said, like I love that Jill mentioned that, because that's probably the most common.
Like the most blatant form of racism that happens in Utah. I don't know. I can just speak that as a BIPOC person. Like, my name's difficult. The amount of times I've been called Michaela and there's no K in my name. Like, you're not even trying to attempt to say it, and you're not even listening to my voice when I'm pronouncing it for you, and it's tiring. So when we fall into that conformity, just kind of coming numb to it, it's important to take note of that for sure.
Just real quick, it's kind of like for Black folks, like our Black community, a lot of their indigenous names were replaced, or even, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Just re-given a different name just because it was easier. it's happening to us, you know, here in modern day, and I don't want that to happen to us. And that's something I feel like we can learn from the Black experience, that it's happening still today.
We just got a question from RB, if I'm pronouncing your name right or wrong. But they say, as a Filipina, I've been identified as a Pacifica woman. What are your thoughts on this? Should I reframe them from calling me that?
Can I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
There are indigenous people of the Philippines who were Pacifica Islanders, right? But because they had been taken over by Spain, by Portugal, by, you know, there's just been so many people fighting over the Philippines that a lot of people feel like they're not part of the islands anymore, which I feel like comes from colonization. You know what I mean? It's that's mine, you're not ours type of situation. I embrace Filipinos as indigenous Pacificas, because that's just what we are. We're islanders.
Yeah, I think Philippines are like, they're within the like Polynesian lands, and so I identify them as indigenous Pacifica people too. So yeah.
A lot of their tattoo artwork kind of mirrors Hawaii's, a lot of theirs, and a lot of the Pacifica tattoos. So just a lot of their culture has been erased, so that they're forced to feel like there's something else other than.
Mhm.
So don't be embarrassed, girl.
Yes, name it. Let's move on to the next.
Okay, again, I'm sorry. I'm really mad that this person is not in here no more. What is your take on missionary work then? I think in reference to the paradise trope. Doesn't the church donate money back to the islands all the time? I think it was in reference to the $2 wage.
My exact face.
My exact face there.
I don't know. It's kind of difficult. When I was like researching it, back in the days, like I just know like from history, Christianity, like if people didn't conform to, like, this is just going back to like our history. If people didn't conform to Christianity, they were killed off for it. So in a way, I don't think that white people saved us, but like the people just, our people kind of just did what they thought was correct. And so I think modern day missionary work, I definitely think more can be done for our islands, especially in Tonga. Yeah, we are people who are about to be bankrupt to China. And so if they are donating back to the islands, how is that happening? So yeah, that's my take on that.
I think of Christianity as colonization. So that to simply answer that question. So I don't know that there's any amount that can really pay or sort of compensate the loss of our indigeneity and erasure. So that, yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, I definitely think Christianity provides like a sense of like, it's a sense of identity for our people. Yeah, I just don't really see a lot of effective missionary work, I guess. So
kind of experiencing it, missionary work, kind of we impose our own ideas.
Yeah.
Like a religious outlook on things, and a lot of the times I was fighting with people like, what you think is wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Which is what is kind of happening. We're forced into a box of thinking certain ways. But missionary work specifically to like Tonga. They brought Leohana. So Leohana is a big high school in Tonga, but you have to be LDS to attend. And from Leohana, they have opportunities to get to BYU Hawaii or other colleges. There's also some other institutions like Queen Salote. Those are the big ones, but it's like a Methodist church. So in those ways, I feel like they give back in giving opportunities to, you know, further education or get off the island and create a different lifestyle for yourself. But I also feel like it's damaging because you come back with the same ideas that would work in America, don't necessarily work in the islands. Does that make sense? So yeah.
I see your hand and we're going to pass it to you next. Just, I wanted to say, I did have somebody message me about not ridiculing people's questions. D.I.V.A is a safe space and all opinions, all questions are welcomed. The laughing came, I think, because we talked about, we answered the question throughout the PowerPoint already in terms of what Pacifica's relationship with the LDS Church was. So it wasn't an offense to the question or the opinion. It was just like a personal, a lot of people laugh at trauma too. That's a coping mechanism for people of color. But yeah, Mila, did you want to say something about that too?
Yeah, I just want to keep note that all the validations and experiences of people of color are safe in this space. They're embraced in this space. This space is for us to feel welcome and validated, because when we walk out into reality, we're not embraced. Our experiences, our feelings are not validated. So, and when to touch base with laughter, even Marosa was saying this, when she's laughing, it's not like this is a joke. No, this is laughing as, oh, I want to laugh because I'm coping rather than crying or getting angry. We have different ways of feelings and reacting to our trauma. And so it's not to say that's ridiculous. It's just that were you paying attention to the entire presentation when this is being covered? Like this space, like we allowed this conversation to happen. Are you really listening and looking at the resources and paying attention? Because this is a space that's provided for that, where again, in reality, there's not enough space for that. So we just want to keep note of that.
And then we see your hand up. Do you have a question in relation to what we were talking about?
Hi, I'm Narissa, and I just had a comment regarding the missionary work with the LDS Church. If that's okay to say something.
Yes, anyone who has sent in questions, if you want to ask your questions verbally, we would love that.
So just adding to, this is my own personal analogy in terms of like global colonization as it relates to Christianity. The missionary work that's done, not just in the islands, but around the world, typically more economically impacted nations, such as the islands, where they provide scholarships that are a pipeline back to or through to the United States and other countries such as New Zealand, Australia. Just kind of looking at it, also, it just kind of reciprocates the ideology of white supremacy and that colonized thinking of Christian reform. And so when you give the group of people scholarships to their educational institutions, and then they're going to come back and continue to contribute to these ongoing systems that really aren't built for them. And so then you get a group of people who are also now people of color and coming from these islands or other nations that are contributing and supporting these white supremacist systems. So that's all I wanted to say. And so that's how my parents came through to America. Was my father was on a church scholarship through the Polynesian Culture Center, and then he also went to BYU prior to it becoming BYU Hawaii, and then segued his way to get a higher educational degree. And then honestly, at the end of his career also was a victim of the systemic oppression here in the United States. So That's kind of just a short tidbit of what I just want to add it on as it relates to not just the LDS Church, but other forms of Christianity.
Yep, that totally brought it full circle. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I think that was like a perfect example. A lot of us are like operating under like this capitalistic system, which kind of gears. So in capitalism, there's like no room for cultural importance. It's the customers' needs and things, and I think that's like perfectly ties in with like the tattoo. It's just a way for people to make money now, and so a lot of polys are they're benefiting from it, but we're contributing to a system that doesn't benefit us. So yeah.
And then let's do 2 more questions.
Okay, how are Moana, Lilo and Stitch / Disney representations viewed within the Pacific Islander community? Are they seen as positive or negative representation, or does it depend on who you ask?
Anybody want to go first?
I think it depends on who you ask, because I do know a lot of folks in our community that are just proud to have the representation, which I also can understand. I mean, personally, I don't agree with Moana, for example. I didn't agree with everything, but I sat and I cried watching the movie when I first watched it, because it's just seeing our people getting visibility in that way was really important to me. And like I said, while I don't agree with everything, I think there is a beauty in it, but it's a very nuanced conversation, which I also understand that to be. And so it's kind of just, but I also think if you understand our position in a society that's ruled under white supremacy, and the media industry is an institution itself. So kind of understanding that and the harm that it'll always reflect is how I understand it.
Yeah, I think it kind of just depends on who you ask. I know Moana, they did a fair amount of research, and so it's nice to have people who actually go and learn about the traditions and like the culture. And I think we really are still in the early stages of being like minorities in America, where any kind of representation we're kind of grateful for. So that's my take on it.
I definitely don't want to be, one to looking for crumbs on the ground.
Yeah.
That's just how I look at it. I feel like if you are a corporation such as Disney, you have the means to do your due diligence on getting the origin story of Maui and how the islands came about. And not only that, but also in the movie, something that bothered me: chickens and pig are not indigenous to the islands. They were brought there. One thing that bothers me is like even pineapples aren't indigenous to Hawaii. But these things are always just thrown in as these are islanders.
Yeah.
Pigs, roast pigs, apple in the mouth. Apples aren't even from there. Anyways, also the poor representation of like even the different dialects that could come from being Pacifica, which they were throwing in a lot of different languages.
Yeah.
That didn't really mix well. And so for me, you have the money, do your homework.
Mhm. Period.
Sorry, and it just goes back to even like Hobbs and Shaw with
Dwayne Johnson.
Dwayne Johnson. And I get that they did a lot of work with trying to get a lot of Pacifica people involved in those movies. But once again, in one of the scenes that they're fighting in, they just start yelling in Samoan and Tongan, which wouldn't really happen. The Samoan and Tongan language is totally different. So if someone was to stand there who was fully Tongan, they're like, wait, he just said something in Tongan and then I don't understand the rest. So it just goes back to, yeah, due diligence.
Okay. See, this was Emily's question that was mentioned in chat. She goes, is there a way to support Native Hawaii tourism without being a colonizer tourist? Donate to groups there, but don't go. I sometimes feel like there is no way for white people or non-Pacifica people of color to be on the islands without doing harm. Thinking of all the white people who traveled there without being vaccinated during the pandemic.
Such a good question.
I think right now, especially with COVID, don't go. That's, yeah, shortly put, just don't go, especially with it's unsafe, especially with the lack of resources and accessibility they have there on the island itself. They are not going to be able to support themselves, especially they're already struggling. So I would recommend not to go now. There are various orgs and Indigenous Hawaiian organizations and alliances that exist on the island that are fighting for the returning of their land and other ways for their survival. And so we'll have to share those, but they're out there, they exist, and the work is very prevalent there also. I think they're one of the leading, I feel like, Pacifica organizers that we can pull from here on the mainland. So the work is well and happening there. And I also want to, it's specifically, I think and I'll type in the chat, if you were to research it or look for it, it would be under like Kanaka Mali. Excuse my pronunciation, but that is the Indigenous Hawaiian name for Indigenous Hawaiians that live there.
That's a difficult question, just simply because already imports are expensive. And so with everything being tied up resources wise, and the prices going up, the more we take and the more we participate, the more we take from Indigenous. And I see a lot of influencers moving to Hawaii, like, oh, we're just gonna make the jump. We've moved to Hawaii. And I'm like, you just perpetuate the hike and skyrocketing of land prices there.
Yeah, I definitely think it's hard for white people to go there without being like a tourist, because you're going there to tour it. I was thinking like what would be the solution to this, because like we could say like go shop locally, but then again, like just them being there, yeah, I don't know, it's a paradox. Yeah.
We had a hand raised in the chat. If you would like to unmute yourself and just speak.
I think it's Mosi. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry.
You're good.
That was an amazing question. Me and my sister were actually just talking about it, and there's alternative ways to support their tourism without actually being there. So online businesses, anything online would be able to help support or sustain their income. But actually being there, I believe a good majority of them are telling everyone to stay out. So you're being respectful and also helping to support their income by purchasing online. So, okay, bye.
Love it, bye.
We are going to get a list of resources created and share it to all the audience members who are here today. I'll be in contact with y'all too for y'all to send me even more. But if you're worried about how to keep yourself educated and see these realistic representations, we'll make sure to get all those resources to you after. But
We've
oh, what were you gonna say?
in the series for cultural appropriation, if you've not been to all of them, they're going to be posted on our website at some time soon. So if you've had family members that wanted to be or that weren't able to, they'll be up there.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up for today. Thank you again for donating your time to us. We will support you in every effort in the future. We'll be right here in your corner, and hopefully the rest of D.I.V.A's followers will too. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and
Thank you, Nia.
thank you all for coming.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Bali Dache.
Okay.
Yeah, y'all are free to stay on at the end if you want to talk about anything. I'm about to kick some people out. But I'm going through the chat and saving all those resources.
Yeah, so I was keeping track during, so I have a list right now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I've seen that. She was on the ball.
Heaven sent. Perfect. I'm going to share with you the Google Doc that we have with all the questions and stuff. Evia, looks like you're safe for that one.
I also saved a few of the kind of like small quotes or clarifications as well, that some of y'all put in the chat. So
Yeah. How'd y'all think it went?
I thought it went good. Especially with all the last minute changes. So
Okay, let me stop recording actually.